So I'm joined here with Armunn, and we're going to be discussing not necessarily the anime itself, but there's a few episodes that caught our attention within the anime Kino's journey. I think it's from the year 2003, and specifically episode 5, and there's a few other episodes we're going to discuss, and some of the themes within that. So, of course, Armin sent me it. I watched maybe halfway through, 3/4 of the way, and then I wrote up a little thing on it. And what caught my eye was this idea of civilization as a closed loop, and Kino, who is the main protagonist, is on a journey. Of course, Kino's journey. That's why it's called that. On her motorbike, and she is traveling along this railway, and she comes into contact with three men on the rails. So it's a sort of harrowing schematic, I guess, of civilization in that sense, and it's a critique of bureaucracy and of the hyper reality of civilization. What else did you take from it, Armin? Oh, firstly, let us introduce Armin. He is here. Hello, Armin.
Hey, man. Yeah, and Saya was here too. Maybe she will chip in from time to time whenever she wants. But yeah, I think that more than the civilization itself, it's it depicts the world view. Because I don't know if you recall one of the previous conversations. Can't pinpoint exactly which. We've been having quite a few. We discussed that. Playing the game was winning. So there was no winner for the game except the game would win if it was played, right?
Mm.
And so that is what is being depicted there, which is so you see the first man on the railroad works that she finds. He is polishing the rails because he says he was given this job 30 years ago or something like that. 50 years ago, and no one told him to stop, right? And so he has a family to feed, and they're receiving the paychecks, he thinks, because he hasn't been back home in 50 years. And he's polishing the railroads that clearly aren't used in a long time. Then she departs, finds a second man in the rails, and he's removing the tracks. He's removing the tracks. He started. This one was 30 years, I think. He's no, it was something. Well, okay, a long time ago, and he started because the company told him that this track wasn't used, so he was to remove the tracks. And of course, she asks, "Well, don't you find it strange that for a track that hasn't been used, it's so shiny?" And he says, "Yeah, it's strange, but it's cool. It even helps my job. So, it makes it easier." And she departs, and further on in the railroad, she finds another man setting up new tracks, which because he was told that this track was going to be used again, right? So, I mean, this is exactly how economy is set up, because it's if in the beginning perhaps economy had to do with some kind of useful contribution, um, and that contribution would be counted as some sort of credit, which could take the form of money or something like that. um, it becomes economic itself becomes the game that needs to be played. And when I talk about worldview, and the psychological level, a lot of it is economics, because it is about labeling the worth and the value of something, and maintaining the perpetuity of that status quo, right? Be it the status that one occupies in the world, be it the way things are. So to remove the unpredictable elements. And so at the psychological level, the best way to remove the unpredictability is to establish any kind of economic system. And I think that what is being depicted there is, in fact, a sort of caricature of economics, because everything, I mean, they were all working to feed their families. And again, families was something that we talked about recently, and these were not volitional families, but units, economical units, because he has to work to feed the family, so that they can keep a roof over their heads and etc. They have to work, they have to follow those orders, and they are doing it for naught. They are wasting their lives away. Uh, I mean, if they love their families, they spend no time with their families doing this work that is absolutely meaningless. One shines, the other one polishes the tracks, the other one removes, the other one adds. So it's all meaningless, but it maintains the game, right? And this is all that matters. And none of them questions, none of them, you know, think that, wait a second, I've been doing this for this amount of years. Um, maybe it's pointless, maybe it's useless. Maybe I should, go back to the company or send a letter or, whatever kind of communication to ask if it's still on, or visit the family, see if they have been receiving the paychecks. None of them do that. They just continue on until someone tells them to do otherwise. And of course, this is also because the anime is Japanese. It's also a heavy critique of the Japanese culture, which is
Yeah.
very much collective.
The
So,
the 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 salary man and such, yeah.
uh,
Well, absolutely, yeah, and this is something you're seeing with even South Korea. I mean, their demographics are at extinction level, and as I mentioned, with and of course it's like that across the world because, like what you're saying, economy has literally economized everything, right, in such a way that everything is now being measured, and this is similar, of course, to the government or bureaucracy, and which government eventually develops into. It will seek to expand itself to govern all things. So eventually, you get this sort of systemic, autopoietic system. I think for I don't like Foucault, but he had this idea, which I think is germane in this discussion, which is biopower, and ultimately all systems, be them economic, governmental, arguably they're all intertwined. They ultimately seek to control the biological seek to control biological life itself, right? And they'll do this under various guises, usually humanitarian guises. Again, anyone who is up to no good will bring into the conversation, some sort of humanitarian guise, right? Or they will say, "Oh, we're trying to save the children, we're trying to save the trees," and all of this. But ultimately, these are um, they're hyper. Well, the system itself is a hyperstition, um, and the hyperstition is the notion of a self-fulfilling prophecy
mhm,
inbuilt into the system, and it's done along deceptive lines. So, for example, like what we're seeing in this episode 5, it is the simulation of productivity. Why? Because the system ultimately is a hyperstition, a simulacra, poor substitution, that seeks, that exists only to hide the truth, that there is no railroad and there is no destination. So it's hiding the truth of its own lie, right? Its own
yeah,
fundamental lie. And the fundamental lie itself, the hyperstition, is what maintains the individual in this state of repetitive, mundane, meaningless tasks for nothing else than to brand them vis-a-vis attention capture. Baudrillard mentioned this as well, called the third order of simulacra. That is everything to do with hyperstitions, and this is where people, I think, get mixed up with the idea of the simulation as, oh, we live in a digital simulation, as opposed to a simulation meaning a sort of simulacra, a poor substitution, a hijacking of the organic. So, yeah, effectively, the system it's obsolescent. From its out, it was obsolescent from its outset, but it's certainly obsolescent now, and thus it seeks to conceal that obsolescence through keeping the drones of the hive busy, so to say. I mean, so it's you ultimately, like what we're seeing in that episode. She is traveling through this as a sort of outsider. Kino is, and
Yeah.
she is seeing the absurdity of it all. Of course, she's engaging with these individuals. Yes, she's being critical, but she's being critical in a non-judgmental manner. So she is sort of outside of this desert of the real, in which all of the other ones exist within. And there's several parables. I can recall one of them, the country where no one has to work. And
Yeah.
that is that. I mean, that is a superb parable that she mentions there. And there's something else she mentioned that's mentioned right at the end with a parable. I think it's you mentioned it with the
The
prior to
democracy. Yeah.
recording. Yes, yes. So
Mhm.
yeah, effectively, the entire episode's a critique of civilization as being a closed feedback system that ultimately is the railroad. It's meaningless, totally meaningless. It merely exists there as a sort of an illusion, and the illusion itself is a visual marker to try and provide reality to what really is completely bereft of it. And that's how
Yes,
all of these various systems work.
and another aspect that we must realize in that metaphor is that if we consider the railroad company that hired these men to be a sort of representative of a state, right? So the state ordered these men to do these jobs at different times, knowing full well, of course, that the previous one was polishing, the other one was removing, and the other one was setting up again. Um, the state there works entirely on the creation of problem, let's say, work to be done to maintain itself, right? So it's because if we look at the ideologies of left and right, right? So, for example, right, you would have nationalism. I mean, sometimes called fascism, although it's not necessarily the same thing. And on the left, you have communism. So one is national, the other one is international. But both of them focus heavily on the economic side, right? Both of them promise work, promise, to take up the, uh, um, the situation of the worker and to keep the worker employed, right? So both of them promise, virtually no unemployment and all that, etc. So both are economic. And the only way to do that, the only way to ensure that, is by creating problems that need workforce to be resolved, right? So it's basically down to that: dig the hole and then fill it back up. That idea, right? And this is why the worldview becomes any worldview, left, right, center, whatever, any economic based worldview becomes a veil over the organic world, because the organic world is made up of will, of the will of life. You know, life has a will. It doesn't ask for license or permission to exist and to manifest and to do its thing and to, you know, a bird doesn't sign a form, fill out a form to sing from this time of the day to that time of the day. The bird sings, right? The river flows, the sun shines, etc. Right? And so these things are put there and necessarily become a wall in between, you know, the perceiver, which could be the mind character in an abandoned psyche, but um, in between the perceiver and the organic world, the actual life, right? Because people, human beings, waste away their lives going around in this, you know, call it marathon, call it game of Monopoly, whatever it is, um, because of this licensing system that is entirely based on economics. Because, you know, in the minds of those men, they have to work to get money to therefore survive. And this is entirely, it's insane. And we've had that comment. Well, not we, it was in a video that I showed you, but there was that comment about someone saying that work is
Yeah.
the greatest value of, you know, I can't remember exactly, but you remember.
Yeah.
That is the you know the job well done and the feeling of moral and honor or whatever it was. That's insane. Insane. I am not saying that there isn't effort involved in being alive. Of course there is. You know, you want water, you have to go get water. And of course we are supposed to have technology that aids that. I mean, human beings are clearly innately equipped to build technology to facilitate their lives, but there is a balance that has been completely obliterated by this fear of the unpredictable, by this necessity, insane necessity of routine. And the only way that a routine can be maintained is if once you have structured things to eliminate as much as you can the unpredictable, you have to cause the unpredictable. And this is, you know, it's completely counter to itself, right? Because imagine that, not imagine, I mean, we live in a world that has been conquered, you know. The world nowadays, it's a theater of pretense that there are several sides. There aren't. And 2020 revealed that there's one side with many masks, right? And many languages and many supposed cultures and nationalities and this and that. But we live in a world that has been conquered by by this worldview. And the only way to, you know, for it to maintain itself is to, for itself, to create some semblance of unpredictability. Let's say a conflict, a supposed war, a supposed terrorist attack, a supposed disease, a supposed economic crash, whatever, to cause a controlled unpredictability, which is almost, you know, paradox, right? But in order to motivate and to give something to do, right? So, and the only, of course, the only end goal is to maintain itself. So, it shows really the absurd insanity of worldview. Um, and when I say insanity, I'm talking really at the deep psychological level. This is, you know, a mind character that I equate to a sort of AI within the mind. It's an organic AI, an AI that emerges organically and has a function in a healthy psyche, but it has been left alone and it's running in a loop. You know, like when a computer program prompts itself and, you know, is just running around in circles and doing the same calculation over and over and over and over again with no creativity, with no actual exposure to organic life, right? And then, of course, well, after you comment, we can talk about the second part of that episode, the democracy part. But it's clearly insane what is shown there.
I must admit, I never got to that part. I only saw little snippets of it. But to comment upon that, absolutely. So I have several quotes that we can go through. But firstly, even the idea of war. If you look at the etymology of war, where does that come from? It doesn't just mean military conflict that's organized, prescribed, formalized by a state. It comes from the Germanic root vera or verso, which means confusion or to literally mix up something. So you have the same idea that you see, for example, with Kino, even Kino's name, which means cinema or movie. Within that of German, what does that mean symbolically? Well, it's the idea of the zoetrope, the wheel of life, the motion of life. That is the source of the thing that witnesses the motion, that captures the motion, which of course is the soul. And the reason she's a female, of course, is because that typically, traditionally, has always been the divine feminine, the spirit. And this also relates to an interesting phenomenon called the Gefangenenkino, which is probably where Plato's cave, derived from in terms of from its phenomenological root, right? And it means the prisoner's cinema. And what they typically found was prisoners and oubliettes, oubliettes rather, deep, dark holes, these dungeons where no light, no natural light could enter. Eventually, after enough time, your mind starts to conjure visual, sort of visual apparitions, if you will, right, within your mind's eye, and you start to project that onto the darkness, and it'll be geometric shapes and things such as that. Now, of course, all of these things are sort of ripe with meaning, as it refers to what we're discussing here, right? The hyperstition itself. But absolutely, you're totally correct. They need the confusion to maintain the concealment of the redundancy of the system. The system itself, all civilization as a model, is completely parasitical. It is a conspiracy by its very definition. It's the collusion of a minority to pursue their ulterior interests at the expense of the majority. All hierarchical systems function on that premise, bar none. It can't be a hierarchy if it doesn't function upon that premise. So everything it does is effectively to induce ignorance into the system, to induce this sort of negative feedback loop. Negative because, of course, it negates any sort of entropic effect upon it. Again, vis-a-vis dulling the actual organic, lucid element within the human being. You do that through tiring their soul, tiring their body, and inducing cognitive exhaustion. But as you're saying, this eventually leads to a compounding effect which destroys the civilization. Hence why we can also infer from this finding that civilizations are probably short-term hosts for a larger, far more concealed and hidden force which acts in a sort of transcendent position above that of the host in any given time throughout history. So this is how history has functioned, at least from the civilizational point of view. So yeah, it maintains the survival of the lie. That's what the war is. And for example, in 1984, we read this quote, "The war is not meant to be won. It is meant to be continuous. Hierarchical society is only possible on the basis of poverty and ignorance. This new version is the past, and no different past can ever have existed. In principle, the war effort is always planned to keep society on the brink of starvation." This is this war, this confusion also relates to routine. It relates to economic pursuits and economic activities such as work. The war is waged by the ruling group against its own subjects, and its object is not the victory over either Eurasia or Eastasia, but to keep the very structure of society intact. And that tells you that the organizing principle of any society is for war. It is for conflict. It is for the inducement of confusion, of ignorance into the masses as a means of controlling them. The authority of the state over its people resides only in its war powers, solely. It can't exist on any other vector of control. Without the war powers, without war itself, it would crumble. It would crumble to dust. And
Yes, yes, yes. It
final,
it needs the binary. It needs the binary, and conflict is the only fuel that will allow it to continue. So go on. Sorry.
absolutely, yeah. And again, as you see these civilizations, any civilization really, let's take our own, because we live within it right now, but it effectively create through this division, through like what you're saying, the binary. Eventually, this binary forms the Lichtenberg pattern that you see in trees, the bronchial system, the what the Pythagoreans called the Y principle as well, right? So it'll reach a threshold of upper maturity or growth, and then to maintain itself, it divides. This is also known as invagination. So these are the cycles of perturbation. And this eventually, these cycles of perturbation actually form, firstly, intra-societal predatory classes, which then vie against the power, um, the establishment itself for power. Right, this is what leads to the disintegration of societies, and it's what also leads to the pluripotency, which is the cell division of these various faults. So, for example, as we were talking about race-based nationalism, and I just bring it up because it's fresh in my mind right now. Look at white nationalism or black nationalism, all of the various sects that have self-divided within this larger umbrella division, right? Be it of white nationalism or whatever. So you'll have the white nationalists, and they'll divide into, I don't know, the Christian identitarians and the pagan
Mhm.
identitarians, or and then that subdivides and that subdivides, because it's the only way it can maintain itself, because it's a lie, and the dead things require this preservation of the pluripotency of chaos, of division. And then finally, and then we can jump on to another that other idea we see in the Matrix, from Agent Smith, and he mentions this quote: "Did you know that the first Matrix was designed to be a perfect human world where none suffered, where everyone would be happy? It was a disaster. No one would accept the program. Entire crops were lost. Some believed that we lacked the programming language to describe your perfect world. But I believe that, as a species, human beings define their reality through misery and suffering. So the perfect world was a dream that your primitive cerebrum kept trying to wake up from, which is why the Matrix was redesigned to this, the peak of your civilization." So it lays it out there as well. I mean, you could call this postmodern thought. Many, of course, would, especially for mentioning race-based nationalism. But
Yeah. Mhm.
this absolutely, directly, demonstrably describes the very nature of all civilizations, of the civilizational model, as a model for the hyper domestication of the human being and their enslavement.
Yes, but what Agent Smith there was describing was a perfect world for. I mean, what he meant by perfect world was a world without unexpected, and that is what the mind keeps trying to wake up from, because despite all the expectations that are imposed externally to remove that unpredictability. So there are expectations of routine, the expectations of predictability. What life itself is geared for is an organic, unpredictable, which does not mean chaos. It means an order that is not known and has to be discovered, right? That is what I mean by unpredictability, in the sense that, you can go about your day and I don't know, in your path, you're walking and there's a stone in your path, right? And you have to go around that stone to continue. That is an unpredictable element that was there and nonetheless had a place, and you resolved the problem, which isn't necessarily a problem, but you resolved it by just walking around. Now, with the predictability, the world views predictability, that stone has to be removed. So you would send a workforce to remove all the stones from all the paths, right, in order to make the travelers walk smoothly, right? So this is the kind of insanity that is Agent Smith was referring, is that the perfect world for Agent Smith is a world that has no stones in any path, right? And that is what the mind tries to wake up from, because regardless of the mind character being abandoned or not, there is this behind the mind character, there is this ego that, being in contact or not, knows that this doesn't exist, that this isn't organic life. You understand? Organic life implies a bit of problem solving, a bit of comfort, a bit of, conflict as well, a bit of everything. It implies a spectrum of experience that isn't just limited to a predictable kind of quote unquote comfort, right? So when that quote from Agent Smith in the Matrix, I think is indeed a machine, trying, because a machine, of course, by necessity and by nature does not have an ego. It's not organic. So a machine cannot picture organic life. You understand? It can only picture a specific partial set of attributes of life. In this case, what is comfort? Comfort is no stones in any path. So we create a simulation with no stones and they wake up and then they wonder why, right? So, of course, the next step is to create a simulation with controlled stones, which is exactly what I was trying to talk about earlier, and that is being
Mhm.
applied, is that the worldview itself creates what I called controlled unpredictability, right? Which is these staged events, these fake conflicts, these economic fake crises, and these fake diseases, and all this. It is exactly to cause the perception of something unexpected. I need to solve this problem. And of course, you never solve the problem, because after that one, there is another, right? There is another controlled unpredictability. But life never allowed to follow its actual course, which would lead to organic unpredictability, let's call it like that, right? So, yeah, that is my reading on that quote about from Agent Smith, that it is due to the inability that a machine would have to understand the entire spectrum of organic life. They can only see it partially, and therefore become a shadow necessarily because of the rejection of the other part.
Yeah, well, this is the reason for the perma crisis, or like what you're saying, the artificial inducement of well, artificial wars, right? I think I mentioned as well that it's the titillation of struggle. So again, it's a simulacra. It's like what you're saying. They create the fake stone within the way to provide a sort of a confusion, a mixing up of what otherwise is a sort of a machinic, um, mechanistic, massified beige uniformity, which is, of course,
Mhm.
what the machine wants. The machine only wants that. The machine can only understand that. It can't understand a perfection born of, imperfect and infallible uh, aspects coalescing together to create this sort of this diverse array of colors um, that ultimately will add up to that white light. It can only understand things from the aspect, I guess, of the void, and so it's it sees everything within not necessarily a constructive shade of that coalescence, but in a more subtractive shade of that coalescence. So it sees everything from the black, from the void, that everything must be this or that. Um, Similar to, of course, what you see in the even Star Wars when they discuss
Mhm.
the Sith. The Sith deal in absolutes. The machine deals in absolutes as well. It doesn't see the sort of grayness, the array of colors that creates the beauty
Does
that is
not see
life.
the individual. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it can only see collectives, not the individual. And as I've stated several times, there is no greater good that excludes the individual. If any idea of a quote unquote greater good that is purely collective will never be good and certainly never be greater. So,
Mhm.
um, yeah, the exclusion of the individual is the only way to remove as much unpredictability as possible. That's why I keep saying that the solution can only be individual. That is where it starts, and then the unpredictable things start happening. Let's call it bugs in the program, or spanner in the machines, or whatever. Those metaphors start to occur because you remove yourself from that collectivized machine-like expectation and worldview. So absolutely, and talking about collective, now that we can sort of piggyback to the other part of that episode, talking about collective, then she visits a country which was what the only survivor there called the perfect democracy, right? And so the story was that there was this tyrant king that was overthrown because he was such a tyrant. And the people decided that they would never have any one ruler again, right? So they decided we would vote on everything. So the first thing that they did was to vote what to do with those that were aligned with the king. And of course, they voted, the majority voted to execute them. Um, as it moved on and no other opponents were there, people who were, for example, they would have a vote on how to organize society after that. The people that voted against would be seen as, well, but this is a danger if they think this way, because they may cause problems further down the line. So let's vote to see what to do with them. And of course, they were voted to be executed as well. And so the democracy that was being shown there basically executed itself into a single survivor. There was one man when Kino visited that country. There was one man there, and he was begging her to become a citizen because there was no more vote. Right? He was alone. There was nothing to vote, and it was by using a trick of voting, because that was the expectation, that she got out of that situation. Because he was pointing a gun at her. Well, you have to watch the episode to understand better. But the parable there is also about this supposed um, achievement of civilization, which would be democracy, right? Which is perhaps, and listen, I am no defender of monarchy or any other system of government, but democracy is perhaps even more dangerous to the individual than all of those previous systems. Because in the previous systems, I mean, they could overthrow the king. They knew who he was, where he lived. You know, they knew who his soldiers were and his guards, and so on and so forth. Democracy is everyone else, right? And it's your neighbors that are the king, right? Or a cell of that Frankenstein king. So it's very uh, interesting to think about that too. Huh?
Oh, absolutely, and that's why they wanted democracy. It's why democracy came came off the back of the likes of the nationalist revolutions. And you need nationalism as a prerequisite, an antecedent and ingredient to democracy, because if you don't deify the nation, you can't empower the people. So
Yes.
therefore, um, the sort of dictatorship of the mob is its primary function is not necessarily to empower the individual within this collective mob, though of course that at times happens, but it's to ensure that the power itself becomes faceless, as opposed to the ancient slavery that we see, for example, in the Lou Marseille, that the French, the anthem of the French Republic. It talks about getting rid of the ancient slavery, but of course, it doesn't state this, but it sort of tacitly declares it that there is now a modern slavery, and the modern slavery is this faceless, um, um, this faceless tyranny, right? This collectivized tyranny, this tyranny that, like what you're saying, you can't see it. There's no figurehead for it. If it, even for example, this is why we can't sort of shrug off the shackles of our current tyrannical paradigm within the contemporary world, because I mean, firstly, you have the changeover every 4 years, which sort of factory resets everyone's angst and anger, and then moreover as well, you have so many facets of government, which of course they claim are to ensure checks and balances upon power, but fundamentally it actually just hypercharges power, because, like what you're saying, it becomes faceless. It becomes a sort of bureaucratic hall of mirrors, right? A
Mhm.
corridor of you know. A corridor of sort of bureaucratic departments that envelops the individual in total confusion. So again, we get back to the principle of war. Um, yeah, and it effectively entirely negates and nullifies any potential rebellion within the system. You can't form rebellions within these systems. Hence why it is the perfection, or near as damn it the perfection of slavery, which is the irony of democracy. The total irony of it. And you
Yeah.
get the patriots, which state, ironically, that in the US case, for example, that we're not a democracy, we're a republic with democratic tendencies. uh, the republic is effectively a stepping stone to a democracy. You could
Yeah.
actually say it's synonymous with it. But the idea is that monarchy is terrible, monarchy is evil. I'm not saying monarchy is great. I actually oppose all of these governmental types. But if you were to
Yeah.
look at it in terms of what empowers the individual with greater agency, and I did in the first book, funnily enough, monarchy actually comes out on top. Funnily enough,
Mhm.
absolute monarchy, absolute monarchy provides the greatest empowerment to the individual, because it actually limits the power of the king, because no one man can envelop an entire country with his sphere of influence. That can only be done through apotheosization of institutions and the hyper bureaucratization, the growth, the self impregnation of bureaucracy. The way it basically divides itself out like some sort of a tumorous cancer. So yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yes, and
Yeah,
this one man, this last survivor in that country she visited that had this perfect democracy, this last survivor was sitting in basically a ruined city, um, completely in ruins, because of course, the civilization had crumbled long ago, and he was still saying that we developed the perfect system. So, so you see that,
that's the mechanical thinking. It is
yes, yeah.
perfect.
So, yeah, it's completely insane, and it can only lead. The insanity will have a tower moment, and of course, that is only appeased. Those tower moments are only appeased by the introduction of controlled change, which changes nothing. It's just a mask. It's just a perception, but that at least vents a bit of the steam off, in the perception of the
Mm.
psyches, and that's the only thing that eases up the pressure a bit. But the pressure isn't gone, and we've also addressed this in previous conversations. And the continuation of this insanity will inevitably lead to an actual organic explosion of some sort, a
Yeah.
psychological organic explosion, where the program disintegrates itself. It's like when we talked about, you said something about the world eater, right? The world consumer. Um, and of course, we all were turned into consumers, whether we like it or not. And when the world eater has eaten the entire world, the only thing left to eat is itself, right? So I think that moment will inevitably arise. And this is not, a prediction or anything like that. It's merely a logical consequence that I'm not saying it's within our lifetimes or anything like that. I don't have enough data to state such a thing, but it's the logical consequence at the end of this track, of this railroad track, right? It's that the world consumes itself. Imagine that the man um, polishing the tracks, uh, uh, you know, gets too old, starts getting slow, and is caught up by the man removing the tracks. And then they both learn the truth, right? And then eventually they're caught up by the man laying the tracks. And then they three realize that, the futility of it all, that they wasted their lives. And this breaks the program, you know? This breaks even the most stern of the mind characters, it breaks them. And this is, of course, what is the attempt to be avoided at all costs by the worldview.
Yes, yeah, it has to keep people divided along the railroad track, along
Yeah.
the circulatory route, or loop rather, of this civilizational model. At least cognitively speaking. So they don't want people meeting up. You saw that, of course, in the event of 2020. They basically
Yes.
cut off. They called it social distancing, but they cut all they cut off all social contact, right? That's of course an example of doublespeak, but um, it's the reason democracies are also probably the most insane systems, right? And I mean, they're all insane. Civilization itself is insanity, but you know, all systems are parasitical, effectively. But democracy is really, I mean, and what we have to remember, democracy just doesn't appear from the vacuum. It doesn't appear of its own accord. It's like a form of anacalypsis, right? It's a cycle. It's a cyclical marker that is formed from a previous governmental system. So within the system of anacyclosis, political evolution, democracy typically comes about right at the end, prior, of course, to the Caesar or tyrannical figure. Like what you're saying, right? It creates the perfect system because the Caesar
Mhm.
fundamentally destroys everything. It ruins everything because it wants to upturn all stones. And the reason for that is because it's jaded by democracy. Um, democracy only exists. I mean, all systems exist, but on this premise, but democracy acutely exists in the perception of the mind character, right? So its existence exists within that. Um, it's a figment of the imagination, absolutely, and thus, in a pure democracy, the state basically admits tacitly that it has no soul, which is why democracies typically are brought about at a time where the civilizational energy is so spent that the civilization throws its hands up, figuratively speaking, and says,
Mm.
"We have no telos, we have no purpose. Where are we going? We're on the we know we're on the railroad, right? But can we provide an artificial sense of purpose? Because we've lost that spiritual sense." And this is where democracy comes in, right? And democracy effectively is the temporary therapeutic of that, which is that it simply states, well, we have no purpose, but we have numbers, right? And
Yeah.
so we'll simply just aggregate the delusion of the mob, and we'll base everything on that. And what effectively happens is that the delusions of the mob become more and more and more and more delusional because the entire system is predicated upon delusion, right? Again, don't get me wrong, all systems are predicated upon that. It's just democracy, admits it honestly, well, as honestly as any of these deceptive
Final
systems
stage.
can be.
Democracy is the final stage of the natural, which is not natural, but the logical progression of the program, right? So, and all systems, democracy included, end up in paranoia, like we've discussed in the past as well. And the increase of bureaucracy, for example, is a sign of paranoia. Because what is bureaucracy? Bureaucracy is a tighter control over the distribution of license, therefore the distribution of will, right? So it becomes entirely paranoid over what you want to do, right? So you want to do this, you have to get a license and fill out the form and explain yourself and whatever it is and etc. and get a document saying that you're allowed or not allowed or at this time or at that time or whatever it is, right? So it becomes paranoid necessarily because to exist it requires an opponent, and of course
Yeah,
that opponent doesn't truly exist, but that opponent is created by the system itself in a controlled manner, yes, but that nonetheless generates in those who don't know, because this is highly compartmentalized. When people talk about the worldview writers, these are but a few people who knows where, right? But those below actually believe they know a bit, but they don't know the whole story. So when they see an opponent, they might consider that that opponent is actually there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce. And that increases the volitional, um, here, volitional in terms of the mind character, the
yeah,
volitional participation in a collective paranoia, right? That we saw, for example, the paranoia about terrorists, the paranoia about diseases, the paranoia about the economy,
or
the
even hate
yeah.
speech. I mean, for example, here
Yes,
you have
yes.
now definitional legislate. This is now legislation, and part of the recourse of the state against what it deems as terrorists. Uh, if you uh, it's defined as a hostile activity against the state if you embarrass the prime minister at specific moments. So that's now within the UK's sort of legal and political lexicon. And like what you're saying, it ends in paranoia, and that paranoia eventually, like what we saw of the managerialist system of the Soviet state, it eventually ends in complete destruction because,
Yes.
well, you have the tyranny of the worker or the polisher in this case, back to Kino, and if you bring out any information that reminds the either the citizen or of
Mhm.
the subject of the system, reminds them of their own powerlessness, and reminds them of this complete imagined state of affairs, then basically suggesting the rails are rusted, then you are a terrorist. You're inflicting terror because it's in this system. It's it's um it's an act of terror to suggest that the system is built upon ignorance.
Yes.
This is the paranoia.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And how would you explain, you know, how would you walk up to a man that for 50 years has been polishing railroad tracks? How would you explain that, his job is pointless, that he wasted his life? You can't. You simply can't. He would rather kill you. He would rather, report you to the company and to the police and to the whatever than you telling him the obvious truth that he would deny with all all his might, right? So it's complete insanity, complete insanity. By the way,
It's
there was another sorry, go
I
on,
was
go
just
on,
going to
sorry.
say finally as well, in a democracy, they also are looking. It's not just that they're paranoid because of that. They're in the case of the polisher, for example, or any of the other two upon the railroad track, they are looking to kill people who claim that the system is effectively predicated upon this ignorance of the individual. Um, because again, the system wants that because it provides a scapegoat. It provides again that titillation of struggle, that simulacra of the artificial war, and the mob craves that. It craves the confusion, the mixing up, basically it craves predatory entropy, and this is why it also leads to self-ruin. It demands drama, and this is why social media was developed. This is
Yes.
why drama drives views, because in the age of the plastic man, of the hollowed out individual, or automaton really would be the more precise term. They basically all they now desire is that drama, is that titillation of struggle, because they're living an unnatural life. In a natural life, you wouldn't want that. You would want peace. You would want harmony.
Mhm.
Because, like what you're saying, you get the diverse array of all the colors of the spectrum, if you will, of nature. You don't get that in the beige uniformity of civilization. Therefore, you have to generate the stones. You know, you generate the stones in this case by the stoning. The collective mass frenzied of the stoning. You know,
Yes, 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 and that's why, of course, also in 1984, um, it was described that sometimes they would present in the public square a captured soldier, right? Exactly to be the um, center of hate of the entire population, so that they had someone to hate. And of course, you had the 5 minutes of hate as well. But in this case, it was an actual person that was, exhibited, or an actual person. We don't know if it was an actual person, but that it was depicted to be there, exactly to be the target of that stoning, of that hatred of the mob that requires the enemy to be continuously there. Otherwise, they don't exist. And when we say enemy, is not necessarily an enemy in the traditional sense. It can be a problem, and the problem can be the train needs tracks to travel, and you need to polish those tracks. You need to replace those tracks, and so you create an eternal cycle of problem resolution, or whatever you want to call it, problem tackling, that never ends. That is continuous, and that is completely artificial, because, as we saw in the episode, there was a train going by there in over 50 years. There wasn't a
Yeah.
single train going by there. It's impossible that a train passed in 50 years, because the guy was polishing, the other guy was removing tracks, and the guy behind him was laying the tracks for eventually, perhaps, a train to pass. So in 50 years, they were doing basically nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's strange as well, because I think you're starting to get to an inflection point within the civilizational arc, at least as it relates to the West, and I guess Western civilization. Though this is occurring all over, I mean, the demographics alone speak of this, but there's a lot of people within the West, and even East Asia as well. You have the sort of lying flat culture there as well. You have the quiet quitting here, but there's a lot of people that are starting to realize that effectively we live in a fake economy, a fake world. The society
Mhm.
is fake. And this is why quiet quitting or lying flat is taken off, because they realize that the work that they that basically it's a simulation of productivity. That the work that they do, the time that they put in, it fundamentally produces no value, and thus consequent to that, and even well, even yeah, consequent to it. But I mean, this really comes from fiat currency creation. The, there's the currency, the value of the currency isn't tied to the health of the economy. Health meaning, productivity, products being produced, supply, demand, the velocity of productivity in the creation of those products. It doesn't. So they've realised that the economy has actually moved from a more material, quantifiable base, a base of productivity, is based upon products within that economy, to thus an economy of attention. And so the economy of attention ultimately it tacitly admits that yes, the economy is fake, but we still need to grind your bones to make the bread of our profit. So therefore, we'll do it through your attention and attention capture. Um, and yeah, I mean, I don't know. Does this occur at the end of every civilizational cycle? And is this the sort of kernel of the next cycle that survives? Like the Noah and his family upon the ark. Are we part of that ark that will survive the flood?
But
Um,
these
yeah,
but these cycles are accelerated exactly to avoid um, the organic collapse, or not to avoid, but to delay the organic collapse. So, when we talk here, when you say cycles of civilization, these are artificial as well, or have been artificialized as well. Because what we are living now is, of course, a transition within two cycles. So the end of one cycle and the beginning of another. But there's nothing organic about it. Nothing organic. It is a caused provoked transition that the system performs within itself exactly to provide a resemblance of change to, let off some steam and, give hope to some and despair to others and whatever. Depends on your position. Of course, it's better neither to have hope nor to have despair, because that maintains your individuality. You're not hooked up to the collective sentiment like that Eminescu poem, the Romanian poet. But no, I don't think that any of this that we're seeing is organically there. Um, if it was left to itself, let's imagine that the elites, whoever they are, whatever, disappeared all of a sudden and stopped instructing, and the system was left, you know, to its own. Yes, that organic moment would emerge and would be inevitable, and it would cause, I think, an entire collapse. It would eat itself until it could reach, let's say, until it touched, if you dig deep enough, you finally touch actual ground, actual soil. So you stop digging the pavement and you hit the actual earth, and then you can put your feet on the earth, right? And that begins the organic again. And who knows what that would look like? I don't have that answer. I don't think anyone does, not even they. So no, these cycles, we can't.
Mhm.
I don't think that we can specify how it would be organically, because these transitions between cycles are themselves adaptations of the system to survive. You know.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So it becomes perpetuated vis-a-vis
Yeah.
these sort of isolated periods of well, it calls it reset. We would see it as a collapse, because
Mhm.
we're looking at it from a different time horizon. There was something else I wanted to get your um, ideas upon, and I think, of course, it connects with this episode, and it's a comment that we had actually yesterday in the Discord server, and I'm seeing this quite a lot, and I've dubbed it. I don't know if I've coined the term here, but the cipher syndrome. The cipher from the Matrix, where he goes back into the Matrix, and
Mhm.
he realizes that the steak is fake, but he likes the taste of it anyway, and he's fine with living his life out in this sort of simulacrum. And well, I'll just mention this to you, and I'll get your take upon it. Um, so he mentioned, I'm actually, so this is Glenn Beavy. I think his name was Goman. I I vaguely recall him from the first server that I was in. I think it was Spooky Minx or something was her name, and I was part of her server. I think he's from there, but he stated, I'm actually an old friend of Silas. He's not, of course. A conspiracy friend, whatever that means. I'm no longer into conspiracies, though it's interesting he's still at it. And he mentions, it's interesting because I used to be deeply into all of this gematria, the occult, the Illuminati, hidden messages. I knew it all, and I even shared a lot of information with Silas. He didn't. But over time, I realized that what I believed to be true wasn't true at all. One belief after another fell apart, and I debunked them myself. Eventually, my entire worldview shattered, and I knew I couldn't be part of this group anymore. What stood out to me was how little research was being done. Nothing was properly validated. I actually read primary sources and historical material, and that's when the cracks started to show. When you genuinely research these topics, you eventually realize how much of it is recycled. Shallow online conspiracy content. I spent years convinced of things like the Great Reset or permanent control systems were coming, but nothing happened. Life went on. What remained was mostly fear and mental exhaustion. Reading is what pulled me out. That's how I became an ex-conspiracy theorist. Once you follow the sources back far enough, you see how one author copies another until it turns into a so-called conspiracy fact. And that's when I finally let it go. Do real research, I'm out. So what are your opinions upon that, this sort of
Well,
creation of the Victor syndrome? Mm-hmm.
I would begin by saying that he is, I would say, I don't know, 80% correct, in the sense that it is just as he described, a cycle of self-perpetuating, um, let's say, rabbit hole digging, right? I mean, if you go into geometry, you're going to find the numbers everywhere, everywhere. You want to find the numbers, you'll find the numbers. That is how, things are built into language and into the numeric values of the languages themselves. So you will find it, and you can go insane, and you can be completely stressed about the fears of the upcoming thing, and the absolutely correct. The 20% that he didn't get right is that he didn't understand that he was also describing the mainstream, right? uh, and that was the little piece that was missing in what he said, because everything that you could state about the quote unquote conspiracy world, which I am not a part of, and neither are you, I think, right? Because we are not talking
Absolutely not.
here. We are not talking here about the because, for example, conspiracy world. What is conspiracy world? Alex Jones types, right? That's yeah, just around the corner. They're coming for you, and they'll put you in FEMA camps and all of these things, right? But the mainstream does exactly that and validates itself in exactly the same manner that he described, because history is author copying author, exactly as he described. And there are no primary sources. He says he read primary sources. There are no primary sources for history, in the same way that there are no primary sources for the quote unquote conspiracy. And the reason for this is because these two sides are a binary of the system itself. It's the mainstream and the other side, the alternative mainstream, that make up the system. And what is, the actual journey of a true seeker is to go beyond these binaries, beyond these two opposite camps. It's not jumping from one camp to the other because you got exhausted. It is not to get exhausted, and that is why, and I know that you read a lot, but that is why after a while I understood that it was pointless to read both mainstream books and alternative books. It was pointless because they all had the same problems. And so what I had to start doing was using my individual intuition to go beyond those two sides, let's say, those two binaries, the ones and the zeros, if you like, right? Um, and yes, when you are within any of these camps, be it the mainstream, be it the alternative, you are going to get fearful. You are going to get desperate. You are going to get exhausted, because you are basically being made, your mind is being made into minced meat by the pressure. It is a pressure machine, and it is there on purpose. People, let's say again 2020, in the mainstream, people in the mainstream in 2020 were pressured into compliance. People in the alternative in 2020 were pressured into opposition. Do you understand? Both of them came out more stressed than before. One for one reason, the other one for a different reason, for the, let's say, opposite reason, which is part of the binary anyway. So the idea of the seeker is to go beyond the worldview. And once you detect a binary, it's neither. If you detect a 1 and a 0 in a narrative, in a story, in a setting, you know that neither are right. So the idea that he presented there, the method of madness that he presented there is mostly correct in terms of how it's described. However, what he failed to realize is that by jumping to the other side, he is going to be exposed to the same thing. Of course, there's a relief in the first, at the beginning, there's a relief, but then the pressure starts building up again, right? So the idea is go beyond these collective worldviews and discover your individuality, your individual authority, what I call the ego. You can call it something else. I prefer the word ego because it means me, it means I, right? But whatever the word it is, discover that individuality. Otherwise, it will always be, you will always be fished into one of these buckets. There are two fishermen that work for the same fishing company, right? One fishes on this bank of the river, the other one fishes on the opposite bank. So don't go near the bank, you know? Be a flying fish and fly over it.
No,
Then they
absolutely.
can't be captured. Yeah.
Well, this is also like what you were saying, the rabbit hole digging, and there was that term that Aurelius mentioned many, God, probably about 4 months ago or something, weaponized apophenia, and that's
Mm.
it's basically Jim Carrey in that movie. What was it, the number 23?
Yes.
You'll see it everywhere because again, these things are designed. They are produced by the system itself, and
Mhm.
they're unfurled by their controlled opposition agents. Of course, either direct controlled opposition or indirect, unwitting agents of these systems. Um, it's so it protects itself by dispelling dissident thought through the process that, of course, he's undergone, and thus he's taken the bait, like what you're saying, of going back to the society, because you get that initial relief where, oh, right, I can re-enter society mentally speaking, and I believe exactly what all of the other lemmings believe, and I can go back to the sort of um, uh, first person point of view, the tabletop point of view of the society. And I don't have to bother myself with the cognitive exhaustion of trying to see everything beyond that. I don't think he tried very, very well. I mean, the Illuminati and hidden messages, and I mean, those are really pretty crass, crude, basal things. So, um, yeah, absolutely. That's one way the system protects itself through the 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 controlled manufacturing of dissident thought, of rabbit holes, if you will. Um, Something else to mention is that the you, he's this is the problem with some people's thinking. They don't they because they've been nursed on Hollywood movies. And of course, they have this sort of mobbish mentality that they never got rid of, like what you're saying. They never went beyond the binaries.
Mhm.
He was looking for the titillation of struggle. He was looking for the cataclysmic moment. He even mentions it in his statement where, it never came, life went on. But that is the horror of the system, that after everything that we undergone through the event of 2020, all of these various events, right, these abuses of government and civilization, we have just went through like business as usual. That is the grand horror of it all. And moreover as well, it's it shows that he was looking out for that cataclysmic moment. It never came. Therefore, okay, right, it's completely fine. We're all fine. Nothing's going to happen. He doesn't realize that power, that these cycles are they are a slow march. They are designed to be imperceptible because, again, any predator wants to balance its deception with detection, right? It wants to be there to scare the prey, to make them fearful, right? To ensure that they're never at ease. But it also doesn't want to be detected while in while in the hunt, while trying to deceive its prey and to bring it into the kill zone. So there's that balance between the deception and detection with the predator.
Yes, and as we've discussed in the previous nationalist conversation, the fact that you discover that something in front of you is false does not imply or mean that the thing behind you is true. This is because that is the nature of the binary, right? If you are in between two falses, oh, let me choose the false, like the lesser of the evils.
The
No,
lesser of two
evil.
evils. Yeah.
Yes. No, no, but choose none, right? Go beyond it. Remain an individual beyond it. Of course, you have to deal with society and you have to deal with these things. I know that. I am perfectly aware and I do that as well. But we are talking about individually inside of you. You don't need to pick a side. Just because you found that one side is false doesn't mean the other one is true. This is a complete, utter logical fallacy. You know, you did not prove that one is true because the other one is false. I can present to you two counterfeit coins, and I tell you one is real, one is false, one is counterfeit. Discover the one that it is, right? And you analyze it and you say, this is the one. And I tell you, yeah, that is counterfeit. So you immediately assume that the other coin is real when it isn't. I know that I presented to you two counterfeit coins, but you don't know. You believe that one of them, you believe what I told you, that one of them is real. So one of them is genuine. So this is unfortunately a fallacy, but it has to do with exhaustion. I understand that he got exhausted, or if he did, I mean, I don't know the guy, but I understand the feeling of exhaustion and so on by the rabbit hole digging. That it gets to a point where it's just maddening. But he didn't need to do the rabbit hole digging. I certainly don't. You know, I certainly don't. And sure, I'm aware. I see the same news reports that mainstream will read one way and the alternative will read the other way, and I read it and I see it when it passes me by. But I choose neither. Because I know that this is a perception based system. It is not a direct, kinetic, physical system per se. It's not based on something real. The walls aren't made of stone that you can touch, right? The walls are made of perception. And once you understand that, you understand that you don't need to choose any side of those walls.
Absolutely. Yeah. You go beyond. For example, he effectively left. He left the city for the forest, and then got lost in the forest. Within basically, like you're saying, cognitive exhaustion, which led
Yeah.
to the sort of this angst, which sort of basically insanity, right? Insanity with all of the rabbit holes. He couldn't make heads nor tails of it. He had no epistemic standard. He didn't know even know how to filter it. So he didn't go through any of those processes. And he thought, forget it, right? I'll just go back to the city, right? I'll go back to the consensus reality. And yeah, that's That doesn't
How
mean the
many?
consensus reality was real, like what you're saying. It just means
Yeah.
that he couldn't parse the forest. He couldn't get beyond it.
Yes. And listen, how many um, uh, corporate world high positions were occupied by ex-hippies, right? So the hippie
Yeah.
movement in the 60s, how many in the 80s occupying high positions in corporations came from those hippie movements? And I'm talking about not people, not agents, not, people that were organically or thought that they were organically involved in the hippie movement because they explored it until exhaustion and then went back. And what they did was even worse than what they were fighting against in the hippie movement, right?
Oh
You
yeah.
see?
Absolutely. Yeah. But all of these things
So,
as well were they were crafted, they were contrived by the system itself. So I mean, even looking back on it now in retrospect, a lot of the early YouTube stuff with the Illuminati, with this and that, it's designed to produce exactly what you see here. And of course, this is a cycle. I've actually seen a lot of people, it usually is about 10 years. That seems to be how it was mathematically designed, to ensure that they become reintegrated into this, the city, the consensus reality, right? That you know, to return to the city because they've got lost in the forest. They couldn't pass it. They had no bearings in the first place, and so. Uh, I have to be honest. I have to, admit this. It took me a good 10 years. I mean, all the way through COVID. I would say it took me up to 2021, and I'd been looking at this stuff since I was, probably about 13, 14, maybe 20, I would say 2012, 2012, 2011, 2012 is when I started looking at this stuff. So it took me the better part of 9 or 10 years to really fully understand what was, to filter out what was good, what was not. And people may say, "Oh, but that was you. You're getting immersed into all of this information as an anchor." Absolutely not. Most of the information, like yourself, Armin, I totally discarded because it was complete and utter hogwash. But, and it's the reason I read, and it's the reason I look at other works of art and works of literature and all of this. It's because it broadens the horizon. It's not in and of itself a glowing endorsement of that piece of literature, of that information, of that concept. It's simply a way to broaden my
yes,
horizon.
and don't think for a second that I am judging or saying that reading is wrong. What I'm saying is that for me, in my individual perspective, I found that it worked better if I didn't read. You understand? In the sense
Absolutely.
that, uh, it worked better for me to, maybe because I have limited energy, maybe you have more energy than me, I don't know. But it took a bigger toll on me to read all those things because I read in the past. Not those many books, but I read quite a few, and it came to a point where I realized, I'm wasting my time. That's basically how I felt, you know. And this is not to say that reading is wrong, and reading is a pleasure too, right? If you're reading, at least if you're reading something interesting, it is a pleasure, and it does broaden the horizons. I agree with you. But in my individual, I'm talking what worked for me, and there's no one formula to fit all. What worked for me was to, for me to be able to use my intuition better, it was better that I wasn't exposed, let's say, to those things.
Oh no,
But
absolutely.
so
I,
just
I
to
never,
correct that.
I wasn't implying that you were judging at all. No, I just brought it up as a way to make the point. But it's
Right.
yeah, absolutely. It's a this this forest is a hurdle when you go into it, but
Mhm.
you have to realize that the consensus reality, the only thing that it has going for it is the consensus. And when you
Yes.
realize that, well, effectively democracy doesn't work because the majority of people, I'm sorry to say, are functionally retarded and they are irrational, then you can't actually go back. To go back is to put yourself in the clutches of danger, the jaws of oblivion yet again. Um, I have to be honest with you. When I talk to anyone outside of the people that I know, right, like yourself and my immediate family and what have you, I speak to them as though they are one flew over the cuckoo's nest, as though they are irrational until proven otherwise, until I prove empirically otherwise. And I have to treat them as though they're a loaded firearm. And that's unfortunately that's the majority of people. That is the consent. That's what the consensus reality produces. It produces people that are effectively they're agents of the state unwittingly. So they have the same paranoia as the state. They have the same hatred as the state. Their identity is based upon opposition, just like the state, and that opposition is enforced with violence. Right? It can either be abuse, defamation, or all the way up to actual murder. Or effectively public stoning. Right? Either figuratively, as in you blacklist them, or well, God, even physically, some of the groups in society, I'm sure, would love to stone their opponents if they could get away with it. If the
Oh, yeah.
ethical abandonment of society had reached that threshold as of now, but it has not. Um, so yeah, I mean, unfortunately, that's what the consensus reality produces, and if you don't pass the forest, then that's what you will also become. The two binaries are effectively reflections of one another, like what you stated. They're two banks of the same river, as we say in Scotland. They're two cheeks of the same arse, right? So it's this is it. You have to get beyond the binary. You have to realize that you're an individual. You have agency. You have a soul that was gifted to you by God, let's say, right? The sort of the wellspring of pure potential, undifferentiated and unmanifested, and you have to um, take solace in that. That is your refuge. That is your bastion upon the mountain that is battered by the storm. So you
And
will
this
find
doesn't
no
mean
refuge
that,
in the
sorry,
city.
just to make a quick comment there, just a parenthesis. And this doesn't mean that you live isolated. It means that you will find those that are for you, that are with you, not those that necessarily are assigned to you, or those that you were born into necessarily, but you will find those that are with you for the journey. So go on, Silas. Sorry.
No, absolutely. I was finished my point. You're spot on. You're spot on, and it allows you to form like what we were talking about, actual, not synthetic or imagined tribes that serve the interests of, the central banking system, as we see with the nation state, but it actually allows you to form meaningful and, well, in a way, consolidated and and tribes with self integrity, tribes that can self sustain based upon their own laurels, not sustaining themselves through artificial, well, war, effectively, through opposition. It allows you to create actual tribes, actual intentional communities, actual covenants between peoples of like-minded interests, or of course, even beyond that, of like spirit, of spirits that are alike. Um, yeah. So it's really everything you're seeing within Kino's journey, it orbits these ideas that we've already been discussing, I think. And well, it helps illustrate them in a sort of symbolic manner, I think, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Um, there was another episode, um, just to, as the last subject of this conversation, there was another episode where she visits a country that is, apparently living in peace and all that, but it was a theocracy of sorts because there were these priest classes that were interpreting a book. And the book talked about a cataclysm where the world would end. And they're trying to decipher when this is, right? And so one of the priests, it's like the North Tower priest and the South Tower priest or something like that. And one of the priests, I don't remember if it's the South or the North, says, no, for sure, I've made my calculations and the world will end tomorrow. Tomorrow, when the sun was supposed to rise, the world ends. Okay. So Kino gets there and she goes to the stores and to the hotel and all that. And everyone sells her stuff for free, or, well, not sell, but gives her stuff for free because they say, well, the world's going to end tomorrow. So, sure, it doesn't matter anyway. So take it and whatever. And of course, the next dawn emerges. And unsurprisingly, the world didn't end. And the people gather around the central square, and the South Tower priest is like, oh, I don't know, maybe I made a mistake in my calculations. And the North Tower priest comes and says, no, no, I have made the correct calculations. And the fact that he made a mistake vindicates my calculations. So it's 30 years from now. Okay. And this is not the end of the story, because then she leaves, she goes to the next country or whatever. And in that country, it's a country where everyone is miserable and there's always someone reciting sad poetry. And it's a country that's sort of designed as Venice. So you have these canals, right? The you know what I mean, right? With like the gondolas,
Yeah.
and you have these boatsmen that carry people across. And the boatsman is telling her the story. Well, there was this king that was very happy, and he never knew what sadness was. So he went to the best poet of the kingdom and asked him to, or not asked, but ordered him to compose a sad poem so that he could know what sadness is. And the poet couldn't do it because he himself never knew sadness. So there's a story there that I think it's not important for me to tell right now, but something happened and he was made sad. He was made to feel sorrow. So he wrote a never ending poem, a poem that lasted the rest of his life. And when he told that poem, when he began telling that poem to the king, became so sad and depressed and everything, the entire society collapsed into a depression. And then one of his daughters, or someone, I don't remember exactly, started writing the poem that he was reciting, right? And so made it into a book. At the end of her visit to that country, um, someone there tells them, well, if you go abroad, see, if you want, take one of these books. This is the book of the poems that the poet made. It seems to have been quite popular in a neighboring country. So basically, the theocracy was interpreting a poem to determine the end of the world.
That is well, yeah. As you can see, that has a lot of metaphorical weight
Yes,
to things that we've
yes,
already discussed as well. Yeah, it would
yes.
appear that the entire series of Kino's journey. I mean, we could probably make a discussion on every episode. It's
Not every episode, but there are a lot of interesting ones.
right.
Yes.
Yeah, it's also as well. This ties in. Of course, you have the theocracy and the even the idea of the weaponized apophenia, right? You're sort of you're in. Well, for example, for a lot of the conspiracy theorists, well, the conspiracy theorists really, right? So of which we are not conspiracy theorists at all. In terms of the sort of cliched view of them, um, they base their entire identity upon the opposition
Yes.
to the storm. But this storm is a sort of a figment that's upon the horizon of potentiality. So it was like what you were mentioning. You mentioned something about the control is brought about vis-a-vis the potential, not vis-a-vis the actual discharging of the bullet in the case of a hostage situation. So
Mm-hmm.
therefore, as you see, in a sort of deeper analysis of the conspiratorial culture and its potential contrived origins, contrived by, of course, the very system they're attempting to oppose, ironically, it may actually, um, the entire hinge in which the mental characters are controlled and produced within this sort of conspiratorial culture, it's controlled vis-a-vis looking towards that cataclysmic, sort of theologically driven end times, this eschatology.
Absolutely. Yes.
Funnily enough, that all religions are brought about vis-a-vis this thing, and the irony of it is that unlike Abrahamism, which has this self-fulfilling prophecy of the eschatology, of the end times, of the apocalypse, of the book of Revelation, of the Tikkun, whatever it may be, it actually wants the end times. It wants the chaos. The conspiracy theorist doesn't want the chaos. Yet, vis-a-vis the sort of egregoric effect of pouring your energy into this self-fulfilling eschatology, it brings it about, right? So it's the total irony of it, right? They oppose the thing which, in fact, by focusing upon, may actually bring it about. And how do they focus upon it? Well, they don't look at it in a sober, analytical manner. They look at it as though it's, some sort of infotainment. Most people look at the various videos on conspiracies
Mhm.
for infotainment. They don't look at it as though they're, attempting to make themselves aware of reality, to thus not necessarily avoid reality, but to better deal with it, to,
Mhm.
and treat it with love. And by love, what I
Yeah.
mean is that's the root of acceptance. Love is born of acceptance, right? Not accepting the pure cruelty, inflicted by the system upon yourself. No, it's about accepting that what you can do about the situation and accepting what is beyond your remit of control, which is, of course, you can control yourself, but you can't control other people. So you can only
Mhm.
ensure your own world is stable. Um, there was something else I was going to mention, but oh yes, yes, this idea of the cycles of perturbation, and this was this individual, the flight of Eros, and he brought this up in a recent discussion I did with him. And the idea of the cycles of perturbation or chaos, it actually within, of course, within predators, it produces the a thing called chronoreceptivity or chrononosis, which
Mm.
is the fixation, almost the sort of neurotic fixation with time. So
Mhm.
eventually, these individuals become anticipatory machines, right? This is why, of course, prophecies have such an effect upon people. It's why, of course, eschatologies basically rule the world, and we're living in a world no different than the Bronze Age or whatever age, right? So essentially, in this is how I was just thinking about this. This is how the mental characters function. They function upon this sort of anticipatory model or system, right? The crux of them is this fear of time. It's the fear of the fog of the
I,
future.
I
Yeah.
would correct time there with the fear of unpredictability, because the thing that they fear is not the end of the prophecy. Like, okay, if you truly, entirely, 100% believe that the world is going to end tomorrow, it's not really that you fear, right? What you fear is the unpredictable elements that may stem from it, right? So you have a certain disruption, a complete disruption to your routine as a mental character if the world ends tomorrow, right? So your world, as you knew it, ends, right? And this is what you fear. In the same way that you would fear a stranger, right? Someone that's like a traveler, like Kino, that walks into your town, and it's a stranger, doesn't know your customs, doesn't know perhaps your language or the things that you have as consensus, and it may cause you fear, right? It may cause you fear because it's an element that is outside of that predictable um, status quo, right? So uh, I wouldn't. I understand what you mean by time, or what he means by time, but I would say that it's a quality of the time itself. Because if the prophecy said, for example, that you know, uh, from this moment forth, nothing will change. People won't age, and the time will go on the same as forever, right? Then you don't have fear, right? So you don't fear time in that regard. What you fear is if there's something ahead in time that causes a disruption to the perceived reality, the worldview, right? That is what you fear, and it's not you; it's the mind character that is abandoned outside of the
Mhm.
authority, the individual authority, right? Because that is the one that can't deal naturally with the unpredictable elements of organic life, right? So that is why we constantly live in cultures that is a doomsday culture, whether it is, nuclear war or climate change or epidemics or terrorists or China will invade or whatever it is, or aliens, right? Whatever it is, it's always a doomsday. Doomsday. Why? Because it's the fear of the disruption of the routine that you've grown accustomed to. That is why it is so essential to remove yourself from the consensus routine, right? Um, as much as you can, of course. Depends on each situation, but at least mentally, at least psychologically, to remove yourself from the consensus routine, because even if, and let's just imagine, because I agree with that other guy, nothing ever truly comes to pass as predicted in the prophecies in that sense. But even if truly the world was to end tomorrow, yeah, there's nothing you can do about it, right? So okay, let's imagine, yeah, tomorrow there's a comet that is going to hit the earth, comet whatever it is, right? That is going to hit the earth, or it's been discovered that the earth will explode tomorrow. I mean, there's nothing you can do about it, right? So what would exactly be the fear? The fear on the part of the mental character would not even be the biological death. It would be the disruption
Yeah.
of the worldview that was fabricated. You understand? And that
Mhm.
fear would not be there if the prophecy said that nothing will change eternally. From now on, every day will be the same, and you are safe in that sense, right? Then they don't fear time. The mind character doesn't fear time. But of course, it would cause, like in the Matrix, Mr. Smith or Agent Smith, it would cause far more awakening than otherwise. Why? Because the worldview can only be maintained by the conflict, even if it's the conflict of a disruption way in the future, or a hope way in the future, which would be, for example, the return of Christ. right? If you believe that Christ is going to return tomorrow or 30 years from now or 100 years from now, it doesn't matter, right? Then the hope is the same, has the same effect than the fear, right? Hope and fear, they're a binary again, right? So it's really to go beyond these binaries. And if we understand that the system of perception is held together by a sense of predictability, artificial predictability, anything that threatens that artificial predictability for those who are hooked to it will be seen as a threat. You understand? So
Absolutely.
that is why I just wanted to make that correction. I don't think it's time per se, because again, if the prophecy was to say that nothing would change eternally, so for the rest of time, the fear wouldn't be there. What would be there would be perhaps a an awakening, because then the mind character would start rejecting because it
Yeah.
doesn't match the expectation, right?
Yeah, it only has effectively only has the concept of time, or it's only chronoreceptive to
Right,
the repetition. And
right.
that's of course where the fear is stemming from. There was something else I wanted to quickly ask you as a sort of addendum to this. And what I noticed was with those three characters, and funnily enough, you see this in all creation myths, but to be sort of timely with the festive season, we see the likes of A Christmas Carol, Ebenezer Scrooge, and
Mm.
he has, of course, the ghost of Christmas past, Christmas present, and Christmas yet to come. But you see the same thing with the three, so the polisher, the demolisher, and the builder, the three individuals. Pardon me. So you see the polisher, he scrubs the rust,
Mhm.
effectively representing the preservation of the past against, the devourment of the future and, of course, of the present. And then you see the demolisher. He tears up the polished rail, believing he's an agent of progress. Thus, he represents, I guess, the logic of the present and the hopes of the present for the future. And then you have the builder. He, of course, lays the new track. Thus, he's building the future, or so he believes. And he represents this sort of obsession with the future. How do you see that tying into all of this as well, in terms of the I guess the simulation of productivity and of the civilizational model itself? How does it tie into that?
Well, yes, you have these three phases to any work, right? Even though, okay, you are in the construction business, so you would understand that, if you want to make a new building, if you want to build a new building, first you have to deconstruct what is there. So to, make the ground even and remove any obstacles and so on. So that would be the guy that removes the tracks that were there, right? Um, Whatever that would represent, even if boulders or whatever it is, or make the ground flat, so on. Then you have the guy that actually builds, that lays the foundations, that puts the pieces of the building in place, and does the main thing. And then you have the guy that polishes, right? The guy that does the finishing, the minor details, putting the windows and painting and all of those things. So those are phases, natural phases of anything you do, right? Anything that is made, even in an organic manner, any type of technology or building that humans would do would have to necessarily, logically follow those three phases. So of course, the recognition of those three characters hit home in the deepest psyche, right? Because we understand that these should be working together, and they are actually working disparate of each other, right? If the interest to actually build the railroad um, was there, they could all three build the railroad. one lays the one removes the tracks, the old tracks that were there. The other one lays new tracks, and the other one polishes in the end to make sure everything's neat for the train to pass. Right? But they are not working in conjunction. Let's say they are not building the same thing. They are just going around in circles. One is building the other. One is building. The other one is demolishing. The other one is polishing. So I think that is to cause that that identification. And yes, societies have to go through that because it reaches a point, and I think that we have reached that long ago, where there's no real need for any more expansion. It still needs to continue to grow by the necessity of the way the system is built itself, like the eternal growth, right? But there's nothing more to build. So the only way to make room for anything to build is to, at the same time that you're building, you have to demolish, right?
Yeah.
As you are doing it. So, and of course, the one that is polishing doesn't know that he's polishing something that will be demolished right after. So, yeah, these three, I think, are natural, figures, let's say, psychological figures that we could identify, um, you know, emerging organically within the psyche, but they would only emerge when working together, right? It is completely insane to present them in a disparate manner, like it is in the episode. So I don't know if that answered
No,
your
absolutely.
remark.
Spot on. Spot on. Well, it's
Mm,
the reason for war as well. War
mm,
is that confusion, that mix up. It eviscerates what is presently there, so it creates it destroys the wealth to thus create the room for growth. Because again, growth is all that matters. It's not actually wealth. Um you're not building value, you're just building sort of a temporary store of a finiteness of wealth,
mhm,
and then you subdivide it. You of course subdivide that down by the likes of fiat currency, right, into smaller and
mhm,
smaller parcels, believing that the innumerability of those parcels of this self division of the finiteness of the wealth is somehow increasing the wealth within society. That's the sort of scam of it all.
yeah.
Anyway, man, that was an absolutely fascinating discussion. In fact, we've almost perfect timing on the concept of timing, almost at the 2 hour mark. So, do you have any closing remarks you would like to make?
No, I think we've covered it all. Of course, there may be other similar discussions on other episodes, perhaps, but yeah, I think it was fascinating as well. And again, what I would reiterate is when you detect a binary, when you detect that something on one side is false, don't treat the other side automatically as true. Analyze the other side just as you did the first, because most certainly you will find that the other side that is in opposition to the one that you discovered is false as well. And if you really want to, reach the land, the ground beneath all the pavement, you can't choose a brand of cement, right? So just leave it naked. Let's say, leave it vacant.
Absolutely, yeah. I completely concur with that. So, guys, I thank you for joining us. This was an absolutely fascinating discussion, and we've covered a lot of ground. And yeah, it's quite amazing what one episode, I think a 20-minute episode can produce. A 2 hour discussion on concepts regarding both life and civilization and its trappings. So with that, I thank Armunn for his time, and yeah, I hope you will join us again for another discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.